I'm back, Webster. Oh, hi, Miss Sandy. I just checked with the pilot. We're ready to roll. Remember when a fast food commercial accidentally created one of the most recognizable sitcoms of the 1980s, premiering on ABC in 1983? Webster followed Webster Long, played by Emmanuel Lewis, a young boy adopted by former NFL star George Papadopoulos, played by Alex Karras, and a sharp, warm wife, Catherine, played by Susan Clark, after the tragic loss of his parents. What started as a mismatched family comedy quickly became one of the decade's most beloved sitcoms. Audiences showed up for Webster's charm, George's gruff but soft heart, and Catherine's ongoing mission to keep the whole household from completely unraveling. The show ran on ABC until 1987 and then pulled off one of television's rare survival stories by moving to first-run syndication until 1989, eventually landing at 150 total episodes. Today, we're going to count down 15 weird facts about Webster that you probably never knew. And yes, it all started with a Whopper. But the biggest thing that Emmanuel Lewis was selling the entire time Webster was on the air, well, his age. Stick around for number 1 because the numbers, they don't add up the way you think. Hey, before we dive in, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a deep dive into classic television. All right, who's ready to move in with the Papadopouloses? Number 15. Webster was born from a Burger King commercial. Every show has an origin story, and Webster's is one of the strangest in network television history. In 1982, ABC programming chief Lou Ehrlich saw a Burger King commercial featuring a young Emmanuel Lewis, and his reaction was immediate. He wanted that kid on ABC. The only problem was that the network had absolutely nothing for him. No script, no premise, no vehicle. So instead of building something from scratch, they grabbed an existing adult romantic comedy pilot called Another Ball Game and dismantled it entirely, retrofitting the whole thing around a child star from a fast food ad. The married couple suddenly had an adopted son, the title changed, the premise changed, and everything was reworked around a kid who had just been selling burgers 30 seconds at a time. The pilot still carries the seams of that last-minute reconstruction, but somehow, it worked. Number 14. The couple playing TV spouses were actually married. Webster had one thing that most sitcoms spend entire seasons trying to manufacture. The two adults playing TV spouses were actually married in real life. Alex Karras and Susan Clark had tied the knot in 1980, 3 years before Webster ever aired. So when George and Catherine Papadopoulos bickered and fumbled their way through sudden parenthood on screen, audiences were watching a couple who already had the whole routine down cold. The story went back even further than the wedding. The two first met in 1975 co-starring in the TV movie Babe, where they also played a married couple. By the time Webster came along, they had formed George and Bay Productions, which co-produced the series. Creator Stu Silva leaned into their real-life dynamic heavily, believing it gave the show an effortless chemistry that simply could not be manufactured in a casting session. Number 13. Emmanuel Lewis had a full pop career in Japan. Webster made Emmanuel Lewis famous in America, but Japan had much bigger plans. While the show pulled solid ratings stateside, something completely different was happening across the Pacific. Lewis had crossed well past popular TV kid territory and become a full-blown pop culture phenomenon. He released music in Japan, an actual album. His Single City Connection climbed to number 2 on the Oricon charts, Japan's equivalent of Billboard. He followed it up with another single called Love is Dandan. But the entertainment empire didn't stop there. He starred in a TV movie made exclusively for Japanese audiences called Samurai in New York. And Webster itself aired in Japan for 5 years on NTV under the title Laugh with the City Connection Boy and His Fat Father. Not exactly poetry, but certainly points for honesty. Number 12. Alex Karras almost walked away before the show even started. Alex Karras had spent years building a legitimate acting career after football, so when the show he signed on for was suddenly transformed into a child-centered sitcom built around a kid, his enthusiasm took a serious hit. He had invested real time developing what was supposed to be an adult ensemble comedy, and watching it get dismantled and rebuilt around life lessons and a cute kid was not part of the plan. He absolutely considered walking away. But Susan Clark talked him off the ledge. encouraging him to stay and help manage the tense early dynamic with ABC. Karras listened, and then something unexpected happened. The former NFL defensive tackle, the same man millions knew from Blazing Saddles, turned in one of the warmest performances of his entire career as George Papadopoulos. By the third season, his bond with Emmanuel Lewis had become one of the genuine emotional cores of the series. Susan Clark, as usual, was right. Number 11. Doctors examined Lewis and came up completely empty. At the height of Webster's run, an entire team of medical professionals examined Emmanuel Lewis and walked away completely stumped. Not because something was wrong, but because nothing was. His growth hormones were normal, his systems functioning exactly as they should, and every test came back clean. The doctors had no condition to diagnose, no syndrome to point to, no explanation to offer. The comparison to Gary Coleman was unavoidable at the time, since Coleman's small stature had a well-documented cause rooted in a kidney condition. But Lewis had no file, no label, and no neat answer. Some specialists pointed toward genetics, as short stature reportedly ran through his mother's family, and a late-growth spurt was floated, but never arrived. By adulthood, Lewis stood at 4 feet 3 inches, and the conversation quietly ended there. The weird fact isn't that Emmanuel Lewis was small. It's that nobody could ever tell you why. Number 10. His mother had to ban the studio from picking up the star. Most behind-the-scenes problems on a network sitcom involve scripts, scheduling, or someone's ego. Webster had all of those presumably, but it also had a problem completely unique in television history. People kept physically picking up the star of the show. Emmanuel Lewis looked so small and young that cast and crew members regularly forgot they were standing next to the lead actor of a hit sitcom and instead treated him like a toddler who had wandered onto the wrong lot, picking him up and carrying him around like a human mascot. His mother, Margaret Lewis, watched this happen long enough before taking action. She went directly to Paramount Television and had a formal order issued to the entire production instructing everyone to stop picking up Emmanuel Lewis. The order stood for the remainder of the series. Number 9. Science Gone Bad gave us the mansion. For the first stretch of the series, the Papadopoulos family lived in a perfectly normal high-rise apartment. Then Webster got his hands on a chemistry set. The writers needed a reason to relocate the family, and their solution was to let a child burn the apartment down with science. Nobody called Child Protective Services, and the family was suddenly in the market for a new home. What they landed in was something else entirely. A sprawling Victorian mansion with secret passages built into the walls, hidden stairways, and a grandfather clock that swung open into a full secret playroom. Webster used those passages constantly, sneaking around the house and materializing in rooms he had no business being in. The exterior was real, filmed at the Charles K. Miller House, an actual historic Victorian mansion in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood. In 2016, it reportedly hit the market for about $9.5 million. Somewhere in Chicago, there is a $10 million mansion that an entire generation still thinks of as the house Webster blew his way into. Number 8. Lewis received death threats at the height of his fame. From the outside, Webster was about as wholesome as television got in the 80s. But behind the scenes, it was a completely different story. At the height of the show's popularity, Emmanuel Lewis was receiving actual, disturbing, targeted death threats directed at a kid still in his early teens. His manager and mother, Margaret Lewis, intercepted the threatening mail herself, quietly absorbing the worst of it so her son could keep showing up to work without carrying that weight. Lewis later revealed that some of the hostility came from extremists who targeted him specifically because of his visibility as a high-profile black child star at the center of a transracial adoption storyline. The public heard almost none of it at the time. Margaret Lewis kept it simple. She drove him to and from the set herself every single day, keeping his world as contained and safe as she possibly could. Number 7. A contract standoff brought Webster to a halt. By season 3, everyone at ABC knew exactly who was carrying Webster. The ratings made it obvious. The fan mail made it obvious. The merchandise made it obvious. So Lewis's family and legal team decided it was time to have a very direct conversation about what the kid actually carrying the series was getting paid. Negotiations with a network got tense fast, serious enough that production temporarily ground to a halt while both sides dug in. The future of one of ABC's most reliable hits sat in a conference room waiting for someone to blink. ABC blinked. Lewis received a significant salary increase and a far more favorable deal overall. By 1986, his company, Emmanuel Lewis Entertainment Enterprises, was receiving an official production credit on the show. The kid had gone from being inserted into someone else's sitcom to having his own production company credited on it. Number 6. ABC copied Different Strokes and then ended up owning it. By 1983, NBC had a gold mine with Different Strokes. Gary Coleman's Arnold Jackson had become a full-blown pop culture phenomenon, and ABC wanted its own version. Webster was the result. The formula was familiar enough to make critics squint. Small, charismatic black child, wealthy white adoptive household, culture clashes, heartfelt moments, and a laugh track working overtime. Some reviewers flat-out called it a knockoff. There were differences. Different Strokes dropped two brothers into a widower's home while Webster centered on a newly married couple with no kids, but the comparison stuck regardless. And here is where it gets deliciously ironic. In 1985, ABC actually picked up Different Strokes for its final season, meaning the show ABC had been accused of copying ended up airing on the same network as its supposed imitation. They spent 2 years chasing Different Strokes and ended up owning both of them. Number 5. Webster survived ABC's cancellation. In 1987, after 4 seasons, ABC decided Webster had run its course. Ratings had slipped, the network had newer priorities, and just like that, the show was done. Except it wasn't. Paramount Television had quietly built a syndication clause into the show's contract that activated if the network pulled the plug before hitting a certain episode count. So ABC canceled the show, the clause activated, and Webster simply kept going. Brand new episodes began airing on local stations through first-run syndication. Same cast, same show, same tiny star, just a different address. Younger audiences kept showing up. Local stations were hungry for reliable family-friendly content, and Webster quietly added 2 more seasons and 50 additional episodes to its resume. By the time production wrapped in 1989, the show had reached 150 total episodes. Most shows die when a network drops them. This one just changed the channel and kept running. Number 4. Hollywood refused to see Lewis as anything but a little kid. When Webster wrapped in 1989, Emmanuel Lewis walked straight into the wall that has stopped more child stars than any casting director ever could. 6 years of playing Webster Long had made him one of the most recognizable faces in 1980s television, but that recognition had an expiration date. Most young actors age out of their cute kid roles naturally as puberty reshapes them. Lewis's appearance did not change enough to make that transition easy, and casting agents kept hitting the same mental block. The work he found leaned heavily on nostalgia. Cameos on Family Matters, Moesha, Malcolm, and Eddie, usually playing just himself. Eventually, Lewis stopped chasing an industry that had already made up its mind. He enrolled at Clark Atlanta University, earned a theater degree, and poured his energy into his own production company. It is a wall that many former child stars never find a way around. Lewis at least had the sense to stop running at it. Number 3. Webster fired Jerry Seinfeld after just 1 week. Before Jerry Seinfeld became the man behind one of the most successful sitcoms in television history, he had a brief and deeply unglamorous chapter in his career. He got fired from Webster after 1 week. Seinfeld was still a struggling stand-up comic trying to find his footing in TV writing when he landed a spot on the show's writing staff early in the series. It looked like a legitimate break. Network sitcom, steady paycheck, foot in the door. 1 week later, he was out. None of his material ever made it into an episode. Whatever Seinfeld put on paper that week simply was not what the producers were looking for, and the experiment ended quietly before it ever really started. Then in 1989, he launched a little show called Seinfeld, which ran for 9 seasons, won dozens of awards, and permanently rewired what a sitcom could be. Number 2. Emmanuel Lewis and Michael Jackson were actually close. At the peak of Webster's popularity, Lewis was one of the most recognizable faces on television. So when the 1984 Grammy Awards rolled around, The night Michael Jackson won 8 awards in a single evening, the two ended up in the same room and hit it off immediately. Their friendship went well beyond the usual celebrity handshake. Lewis became a frequent guest at Neverland Ranch and by all accounts was treated less like a famous acquaintance and more like family. Lewis later described Jackson as something like an older brother, someone who understood what it meant to grow up entirely inside the spotlight with no blueprint for how to handle it. Two people from completely different worlds who had both skipped the normal version of childhood in exchange for fame they did not fully ask for. When Jackson's reputation came under fire in later years, Lewis did not quietly distance himself. He remained one of Jackson's most consistent and vocal defenders, speaking publicly about their friendship long after it was fashionable to do so. Number 1. Lewis was 12, playing a 6-year-old, and 18 by the finale. Audiences spent 6 seasons watching Webster Long stumble through childhood, learning life lessons and causing chaos. The whole act was completely convincing. It was also completely fictional in ways nobody fully appreciated at the time. When Webster premiered in 1983, Emmanuel Lewis was 12 years old, playing a 6-year-old. Thanks to his naturally youthful face and unusually small stature, the illusion held up so completely that most viewers never once questioned it. Season after season, Webster Long stayed frozen in time as a young kid figuring out school and family life, while the actor behind the character kept quietly aging out of that reality. By the time the series wrapped in 1989, Emmanuel Lewis had just turned 18. Legally an adult, old enough to vote, sign his own contracts, and drive himself to the studio, while still playing a child on television. For most of its run, one of the most celebrated child sitcoms of the 1980s was starring someone who technically had not been a child since the first season of Different Strokes. The illusion never cracked. The audience never noticed. And Webster, he just kept being Webster. And there you have it. 15 weird and wild facts about Webster. Which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments and share this with a friend who still remembers that theme song. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, this is Remember When.